In this episode of Occult Unmasked, we will be discussing the different layers of the dimensions or membranes of this universe. Intelligent entities inhabit the higher membranes, the higher dimensions. I thank you for watching. This membrane model that I constructed is based on a biological version of a membrane. No one knows what the different membranes of the universe's separation of dimensions actually looks like, as they are invisible constructs of the universe, but this is a representation of the separations of the different membranes in this universe. And this theory is not mine. This theory is M theory, also known as string theory, also known as superstring theory, also known as membrane theory. String theory is widely accepted among all physicists, scientists, and quantum physicists worldwide. Dr. Michio Kaku talks a lot about them, him being a co-founder of string theory. How many dimensions exist changes from year to year. I believe it's 12 dimensions now, but that is neither here nor there. We live on the 3rd/4th dimension. Just to clarify any confusion for those confused why we live in 2 dimensions at once, the 4th dimension is time. And time really isn't a dimension. It's a trick that scientists use to fool you into confusing you from looking beyond the 4th. Does anybody think about the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th? Not too often. They usually focus on the 4th. They're so confused on what the 4th is. We live in the 3rd dimension, but a ball exists, let's say a basketball. A basketball exists in the 3rd dimension, obviously. That basketball takes up space. It takes up time and space. Space and time are the same thing. Time and space are the same thing. When you walk from point A to point B, it's impossible for you to walk from point A to point B without moving in time and moving in space simultaneously. You can't separate the two. Einstein taught us that space-time and time-space are one in the same, inseparable. So that's why when we walk around and move, we have to walk around in space, we have to walk around in time, they're connected, therefore we have to walk around in the 4th dimension. It's impossible for a 3-dimensional object to exist without it also taking up space. If it takes up space, it also takes up time. Time, space, space, time, we are in the 3rd/4th dimension. Now the 5th dimension, there seems to be, because it's obviously so close to us, as of late, or maybe forever, for the infinity of all time, there is a layer of the membrane that thins, that's a lot thinner than, say, our connection to the 6th dimension. Obviously, the closest one is going to be the 5th, and the layer is very thin. I believe it's more than thin. There are virtually vortexes directly to the 5th dimension to a certain extent where they can communicate with us, 5th dimensional entities. This is where it goes off into the paranormal, where scientists will never touch this area. Scientists will spend billions of dollars creating the Large Hadron Collider to bombard particles with particles to see where minuscule pieces of the particles disappear to, trying to prove that the higher dimensions exist. These scientists, these physicists, the quantum physicists, they all know that the higher dimensions exist. They wouldn't spend billions of dollars creating the Large Hadron Collider if they didn't already have a certainty that these higher dimensions exist. Where we part ways is, I know for a fact, the 5th dimension has intelligent entities, and they don't know. They're totally clueless of this. I know for 100% fact because I was contacted by demonic entities, evil entities, invisible entities. If you're contacted by an invisible entity and you're not crazy and it actually happened, then you're being contacted by a higher dimensional entity. Only higher dimensional entities have the power to be invisible to us. I believe they also have the power to reveal themselves to us under certain circumstances, but perhaps even they don't have the power to fully reveal themselves. It might be based on a case-by-case scenario. These little connections represent where it's the strongest between the two dimensions, or where the barrier is the weakest. I believe if you happen to live in a house with an extremely strong link to the fifth dimension, you might be haunted on a regular basis, maybe move out. That house might be directly on a vortex. I'm not one of those hippie new age people that talks about vortexes. I don't get my information from people in Sedona, Arizona that believe vortexes are everywhere. But perhaps there is a vortex in Sedona. They're invisible, so you can't rule it out. I base whether there may or may not be a vortex somewhere based on the activity. Experience it yourself, and then you know. But I understand if people don't believe me, if it didn't happen to you, it's very understandable. But I know for a fact a thinning of the dimensions, a strong connection between the dimensions exists in certain places on Earth. Whereas most places, there's literally no way to see, communicate, feel, sense, hear anything from the higher dimensions. And that's how it's supposed to be. Perhaps there is a cycle like a solar cycle where the sun has sun flares and the corona of the sun gets strong in parts and has huge sunspots and weak in parts. Perhaps it's a natural cycle of the universe for there to be weak spots between these membranes of these dimensions where entities can come through, they can communicate, they can harass and bother us. It has happened to me. They can look down on us and see us. They're invisible to us because, if I had to guess, sixth dimensional entities are invisible to fifth dimensional entities for the very same reason. Seventh are invisible to sixth. Eighth are invisible to seventh. Ninth are invisible to eighth. 10th are invisible to 9th. 11th are invisible to 10th, and so on and forever. When I talk about negative entities, I'm talking about the lower ones, close to us, the fifth dimension. I do believe even higher dimensional, angelic, wonderful, loving entities do exist. And they exist in the even higher dimensions, and they can look down and they can see these evil fifth dimensional demonic entities occasionally bothering us lower fourth/third dimensional entities. They can see everything. These angelic, higher, positive entities of a higher frequency, higher vibration, higher dimension. So, with all the doom and gloom, yes, there are even higher entities of higher, more positive dimensions that can look down, and I have heard, according to Buddhists, perhaps all care of the earthly world disappears when you ascend to those higher dimensions. So there is good within these dimensions. I do believe our spirit lives on forever. It's an opinion I have. I cannot prove it, but I've had too many encounters with spirits, higher dimensional entities, to dismiss. As far as human ghosts, I think human ghosts are slightly higher than demons, slightly higher than evil demonic entities. I do not believe humans can become demons. I believe demons are a completely separate species, if you will. A dimensional species, native to a certain dimension, and I believe us humans can ascend similar to how the Buddhists talk about, but not exactly. I don't exactly agree with Buddhism. But my grandfather was Buddhist, and so I have read a few Buddhist books, and I actually am going to do a review of the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. specifically the dying chapters I want to cover. There's some interesting stuff in those chapters that I agree with and some that I disagree with. Obviously, I don't know everything. I don't claim to know everything. I'm just sharing my opinions and what I do believe to know, and I do feel strongly and am passionate about what I do know. And there was a commenter that said, "Why are you so passionate about this? There's no way you could know." When I do know for 100% fact that higher dimensional negative entities that are invisible to us are looking down on us, messing with us occasionally. The reason I'm passionate about that is because I know for a fact it is happening. It happened to me. It's really not that difficult to figure out. Biases can cause people to ignore it and shake it off like it's nothing. So it goes both ways. People claim that I have biases, but the fact of the matter is, a bias can both help and it can hurt you. If it's a true bias, it can help you. If it's a false bias, it can most definitely hurt you. I try not to focus on dogma. I try to look at it from a scientific perspective. I wish scientists would look at these possibilities of communication between the fifth dimensional entities that are intelligent and us. But because such cases are extremely, extremely, extremely rare, it can't be taken to a laboratory. Except perhaps if someone finds a vortex, an extremely demonic, oppressed house that may or may not be a vortex, if that house is completely taken over by scientists and turned into a laboratory, theoretically something could come from that. But usually it's paranormal, new age, psychic people with zero credibility and zero credentials, and it becomes a news story that gets lost in the footnote of history. It'd be useful if actual scientists could take over some extremely haunted houses, but if you have seen the new Ghostbusters movie, it's common knowledge that if you were a legitimate scientist or someone in academia, you will be persecuted and treated badly and lose your job and lose anything you've built in your scientific academic career if you say something like, "Ghosts are real." Thank you for watching. New episodes are coming soon. Please subscribe. This has been John Rasmus with Occult Unmasked. Be seeing you.